This is the unrestricted free agent.
The Jimbo Fisher stuff. Were you in the room the other day when he threw?
I was. Part of the reason we had so much fun being Clemson was because we used to talk a lot of shit to them and they couldn't handle it.
You feel fine, but your hands are shaking.
Coach Spurrier couldn't give a damn.
I want to take these athletes and mentor them.
Why can't the Gamecocks win at the SEC tournament?
So sunny all the time, so hot.
Too sunny.
Too sunny.
Fans are going to be fans, and people who understand the sport are going to talk sports.
With some weird dynamics.
It's going to be painful, but I think at the end of the day, we'll be stronger people for it.
Let's get it going on a Monday morning. Thanks for hopping in. Tim Hill, unrestricted free agent. Second week of August. That much closer. That's where we start this one. See a bunch of you already in on the program. Jason, DC, Anthony, and Greg all weighing in with a good morning and salutations to some degree. How was the weekend? For me, the final one. Got to go and celebrate the first day at the family final hurrah, if you will, for the summer. Kids got their teacher assignments a week from today. They'll be at school at my house. Signifies the next season for sure. That much closer to football again. Actually, football practice for Gamecock specifically. No news is good news right now for all college football programs. Up on the ESPN.com today, and Oklahoma and Brent Venables, their program in the news. Never good. It's never good. And Venables comes in, year number one, first year as a head coach, great defensive coordinator run, plenty of experience in the Big 12 and previously at Oklahoma as well. The most experienced assistant coach in the conference, I think I read. Guy who's been there, Stoops back in the day, brother coaches at Oklahoma State, and Mike Gundy. So it's Cale Gundy, assistant coach there, the assistant head coach, had to step down. See you over there, Craig, and see if we can fix that for you. So apparently Cale Gundy, the assistant coach, was in a meeting, saw somebody on their iPad, probably shouldn't have been at the time, but clearly distracted, goes over and reads whatever's on the iPad. Apparently read that out loud, and now is no longer employed by Oklahoma football. That's quite a start. Much different than what we're seeing from Shane Beamer. Quiet this weekend for sure. There's a lot of talking on Media Day last Thursday, right before practice started. Get this from Shane Beamer on Twitter yesterday. 3 great days on the practice field. Love the joy this team has competing each day. And a picture of a little dancing going on, and clearly guys getting after it on the practice field for the Gamecock. So that's where we start on a Monday morning, on August 8th. 26 days, I think, we're doing the countdown away from college football season kicking off for the Gamecocks. If you want to do the official college football kickoff number at large, that week left. So I'm going to click a button here, pop out real quick. I'll let you get a snippet from first Carolina first-round draft pick from the NFL perspective, from Rick Stanford, what he had to say when he was on the show not too long ago about Carolina closing the gap. Let's see if that can help solve a little audio issue. Thanks for your patience. Let's get going on a Monday morning here on the unrestricted free agent program.
I think South Carolina's catching Clemson. I really do. I think, this team And I've said this to other people. I think South Carolina, this is going to be a much more competitive game with Clemson this year. I'll be very, very surprised if Clemson runs away with this game against South Carolina. I think the talent level's getting better at South Carolina. And when you've got a quarterback that can play, you've got a chance. And I think that's the one thing that Spencer offers them. And this might be the first year in a long, long time that I think South Carolina's quarterback is better than Clemson's.
Other day. Appreciate you guys joining us again. Hopefully that, excuse me, now maybe the muffling is just coming from inside my body as opposed to the microphone. Maybe we're all awake now and moving. Now we're going. You guys feel free to give me the heads up on the live stream. All right, Craig says better. Josh says time to get back to school. Attaboy, Josh. All right, good to see. Couldn't do it without you. Thanks for the feedback there. And now we get up and rolling. And man, the fact that you could have an assistant coach gone through not even a week of practice where Oklahoma is now, especially being one of the most experienced assistant coaches, the most experienced assistant coach, I guess, in the Big 12 for Brent Venables. A rough start there. The beach. How was the beach? Oh, and Josh just started school. Good for you. He's the best morning show out there. Just dropping off his kids at school. Good for you, Josh. That's a good feeling. That's a good feeling. The beach was excellent, sir. Great weather. Good times with the family. A great length of stay and amount of people. So I've got two younger sisters. One flew in from the D.C. area, celebrating the youngest 40th. So that's a milestone that we're all now officially in that category moving forward. And last hurrah for the kids and the whole thing. And for the most part, not too much drama with cousins. So good stuff for sure. And now we can kind of get to the business of football season really hitting. And this is getting close. They're still there. Still early, right? Still that new feel, smell, experience, the whole thing. You're not even a week all the way through. Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. The Gamecocks have already practiced 3 times a day. It'll be number 4 this afternoon. So not quite getting into the grind yet, but getting close. Especially with the way college football is set up these days, you get to do a lot more from a coaching staff perspective with players during the summer than you ever had before. And there is really no reporting for camp like there used to be. If you're a college football player, you're on campus during the summer. That's pretty much what it is. Unless you're transferring and trying to get credits in or had to get credits in. If you're in a good place, your college football program doesn't get anywhere close to starting this time of year. It just hits a different level. The only off season is a couple of weeks after the actual season ends, right? Maybe even regular season and then a bowl game. Maybe you get I'm trying to do the math. I was going to say maybe you get a couple of weeks both of those times and you get a whole month off. It's probably not even that much, right? And then after spring ball, you do get a bit of a break. So if you add all of those up, it's probably like a week after the regular season, right? With most teams having a bowl game. Then you're talking about after the bowl game, you get maybe 3 weeks off. But, man, those mat drills in January are real, man. So maybe 2 weeks there. So let's do the math. We'll do 1 and then plus 2 and then maybe 2 weeks off in May or so. So maybe you get a total 5-6 weeks max. But these guys get after it so much every single day in one way or another. And now you're getting the Columbia Heat going in the preseason practices. So there will be no lack of conditioning, no lack physically and mentally going into year number 2. Shane Beamer talking about it the other day, just how far they are beyond where they were this time last year from a coaching perspective, from those guys knowing them knowing their guys. And now it's a matter of, all right, what are you going to do with it, right? And again, no news right now is great news. There was really good news on Friday from the Gamecock football recruiting standpoint, and a guy that they were targeting, I mentioned on the program. And the nickname is just Tree, right? Or Big Tree, big offensive lineman, offensive tackle out of the D.C. area, DeMatha High School, same high school as Marshawn Lloyd, the running back, committed to Carolina verbally on Friday. Got them up a couple of spots in some recruiting rankings, the consensus ones that I use most consistently here on the program. The On3 recruiting rankings have Carolina just up one spot from the last time we spoke. Number 21 in the country, 9 4-stars, 8 3-stars in their class of 17 guys now for 2023. Hope, good morning to you too. Where are you guys' heads at right now? I'm guessing it's just wanting to know more about what's going on. Saw Brad Crawford from 24/7 Sports put out the tweet yesterday. They got social media play immediately. From what I'm hearing, Spencer Rattler's precision is unlike what Gamecock fans have seen in a long time. Craig's all in on the recruiting. The next one, bring on McLeod. I think that would be, actually might be 2 more DC area guys, 4-star type guys that Carolina football is targeted and is hopeful, expecting to get in the fold here and to continue to climb a few spots in those recruiting rankings. See, interesting. Gamecock basketball again, recently relevant in preseason practice during football, which is, again, a sentence that you don't say around Columbia very often. But Lamont Paris getting another recruit in the fold, another commitment over the weekend as well. Former AC Flora standout Colin Murray Boyles, thought to be a 3-star, 6'7", relatively under the radar prospect, I think. SMU, Belmont, St. Bonaventure's, his list of offers. He's going to go play at prep school out in Utah his final year of high school. But certainly not bad news at all. Josh says, yeah, bring on the basketball. Cautiously hopeful. I think if you're talking about getting local guys, always a knock on South Carolina basketball. Gigi Jackson at the top of the food chain from a high school prospect standpoint. Colin Murray Boyles on the other side, I think it's fair to say. No Power 5 offers. So you get the mix, right? And you gotta, from a perception, I should say, standpoint, you hit Gigi Jackson, you're done. You've made massive steps in the program from a recruiting standpoint. And we talked about that kind of ad nauseum. I get it if you might be a little done with that conversation, but this is the opposite, man. This is probably going to be a more consistent storyline and theme for Gamecock basketball, and really probably all basketball programs out there. There are only so many blue chip prospects, right? And every so often they do cycle through. I don't know if we've seen a number 1 prospect in the country in Columbia. Jermaine O'Neal was probably that back in the day, right? But you got a lot more guys that you need to develop, that you need to bring in your program, that you might have the ability to see earlier and offer earlier. And then those guys need to turn out to be good players for you. If you get a great player, fantastic, right? But everybody can figure that out. If you can take a guy that other programs aren't even paying attention to and then turn him into a good college player, that turns your program into a good college basketball program. So that one is, yeah, I can see how you got here, King. King says has the sense of changing of the guard with in-state talent for both basketball and football swinging back towards the Gamecocks. I think it's fair to say, man, because it wasn't just Gigi Jackson, which, again, I don't know if we can overstate it. A guy, the story is, had committed to Frank Martin from Columbia. Frank Martin gets the boot. Program makes the change. He then verbally commits to the University of North Carolina for the class of 2024, right? Still had a senior year of high school, and then all the work that was done to get him into school and get him to decommit from North Carolina basketball, the first guy to do so in almost 20 years, and the first player ever to do so, and then go play for another school. Massive, absolutely massive. So you had that from the basketball perspective. Now, this most recent signing or commitment from basketball absolutely would not go into this argument, King. But the football ones, you get the top defensive line prospect, the edge rusher, Monteque Rames out of Sumter. About this time last week, we're talking about him, right? And the big offensive lineman from Dorman, is that Marquis Anderson, I believe? Number one prospect in the state and in the class, I think. I think it's fair to say maybe. But again, the recruiting conversations can be so limited, right? We don't know if these guys are going to turn out to be big-time players, but it is very relevant because recruiting rankings do matter to some degree, college football especially. I'll always throw out that stat out there. No one's won a national championship without having a top 5 recruiting class somewhere in those 4 years, right? See, I don't know about that. You feel better with Jermaine Couisnard, Keyshawn Bryant back, and the freshman that was so good. Yeah, I hear you'd feel better, no doubt. You'd have a lot more talent in the program or some proven guys. But you'd also, Craig, he's talking about Gamecock guys who have moved on, right? Jermaine Couisnard went off to Oregon. I still don't know if Keyshawn Bryant has landed anywhere. I'll double check. If you guys know, feel free to hit me up there. And DC saying just one or two players make a world of difference in basketball, but there's also a process of changing coaches and making sure sometimes, man, that those leftover guys, just if they don't get on board with the new coaching staff or there is resistance there, you can have a massive power struggle. And so I think especially in this current climate and especially knowing the almost 180-degree difference in styles that Frank Martin has and now Lamont Paris has. I think it might just be best that those guys have moved on and it's a nearly brand new program. But I think from the Gamecock standpoint, King's question is a fair one. I think Clemson fans would just shake their head and say, come on, man, Clemson's what, 5, 6 in the country right now in football recruiting. But just the fact that the Gamecocks getting some top guys in the state and clearly have, I don't even know what the best way to put it, right? Positive momentum was something I was going to say. I think regained respectability is the best way to put it. After six wins in 2 years combined. But more so, like, where the program was headed just from a momentum standpoint. 2 good years from Will Muschamp, getting the program back to respectability and then some, right? You win an Outback Bowl. That's more than respectable. That's a good year. And then after that, nothing. and doing it with the name Will Muschamp, with the SEC. You look over at Tennessee with another Nick Saban assistant coach and Jeremy Pruitt going in the same direction. And at least you didn't have the NCAA issues, but also Tennessee figured out a way not to have to pay Jeremy Pruitt. So you can look at it a couple different ways there. But everything that happened, and then how it happened at South Carolina, the president, all drama, and the board of trustees and the whole thing, just be beyond all of that, be past all of that, to have a guy in that is easy to get behind, I think is the best way to put Shane Beamer, right? It's easy to pull for him. Easy to support a guy who is clearly appreciative, clearly grateful, understands how his job is unique, how to sell players on his program being uniquely special. That is by far and away. If you made me sum up what the downfall of Will Muschamp was at the University of South Carolina, it is that. And I could not have told you that while it was happening, or even maybe this time last year, but now having lived through a full year plus with Shane Beamer at the helm, with somebody else doing it, and seeing how valuable it is, how much more of a firm foundation it seems to be to build a college football program in 2022. I think the sense of that absolutely is justified for Gamecock fans. You want to be a Clemson fan out there and say, absolutely not, you guys are kidding yourselves. Well, we'll see. And Troy says Clemson recruiting more nationally the last several years. Yeah, to me, that one's always a weird phrase. Like, I get it when you're Tennessee, right, and your state overall just doesn't have a bunch of prospects in it. And South Carolina is the same way, right? They're good football players in South Carolina. They're just not enough good football players to fill Clemson and South Carolina rosters. We all know that. Class of 25 guys every single year. Maybe 12, half of that total is what you get with legit Division I guys, I think, out of the state the size of South Carolina. So I guess maybe it's always been regionally that Gamecock football goes. Will Muschamp always talked about you within a drive, a day trip is kind of the geographic footprint. Let's see what's Chris saying here. Morning, Tim. Moving in day Saturday, starting year 2 for my daughter, her cheerleading career. Can't wait for some Gamecock football. Attaboy, Chris. That time of year, man, the transition for everybody. Josh has one good year with Muschamp. Come on, that's a little bit revisionist history, right? It was awful at the end of the Spurrier era. And to get back to a 500 year immediately, that was a good year at the time, right? I can't sit here and tell you that a 500 season with Shane Beamer during the regular season is a good year, and I can't give Muschamp that credit. Yeah, Craig saying getting into Maryland, Ohio, Texas is huge for Beamer. Like, that's pretty national, right? If we're going to talk about recruiting nationally. I mean, the Washington, D.C. corridor, right? The DMV corridor, I guess, is relatively regionally close to South Carolina, but that's never been a thing. We've had a couple of players now and again. I think of Trey Kelly was from Washington, D.C. From the basketball standpoint. You've had maybe a few, but it has become more of a trend. Maybe more regionally. Obviously, the Virginia Tech legacy of Frank Beamer is a thing, and Shane Beamer being a former assistant coach up there, plenty of relationships, doing most of his growing up there. Got it. Josh says Beamer's so positive, hard to see how poisoned it had been. To me, that makes it easier. And again, you can't just say, absolutely across the board 100%. No, man. That's the thing about the Will Muschamp era. Like, his players were loyal. They liked, I think, by and large, playing for him. He is a football guy. But that's what this thing has shown me, this transition. Steve Spurrier, football guy. Will Muschamp, football guy. In different ways, though, right? I mean, Steve Spurrier's background, Heisman Trophy winner. He was always a star guy. Will Muschamp was the grinder guy. So all about practice, preparation, outworking, blue-collar mentality. That was Will Muschamp. Steve Spurrier's had some of that for sure. We can't be that the country club atmosphere or environment that he got the reputation for. I didn't see that when I was out at Gamecock football practices. But doing it smart was a big thing for Spurrier, right? Hey, don't hit your teammates like you would hit other guys. Let's be smart, keep our guys healthy, get our work done. That's great. You made some plays in practice. I'll really respect you when you start making plays in games and you do it consistently and you're a guy who is a difference maker. And if you're not, then I'll probably give you a little ribbing or ignore you, or that was Steve Spurrier. But was he going to enjoy talking to alums and fans? And no, he was never that guy, right? Always a little standoffish and did what he had to do. But he could connect to football players. That he was his team. That's where his sweet spot was. And Will Muschamp, definitely a football guy all the time, but man, almost too much of a level. It was too closed off. It was very Nick Saban-esque, and obviously it works for Saban, right? But you got to win at such a high level to put up with not being the other parts of what you need to be now that Shane Beamer continues to show off, right? I mean, he's on social media last night, put up the post already with the picture of 3 days in, loves the joy his team is competing with. And that's part of the transition too, right? I don't think we heard the word joy once in the Will Muschamp era. I don't think we heard it from Steve Spurrier or Lou Holtz or Brad Scott or down the line. There definitely was a feeling of joy. You beat Clemson 5 years in a row. Gamecocks fans felt a lot of joy in that period. 3 top 10 finishes, joy. But it's not it's not the overriding term. And Steve Spurrier didn't feel joy not winning SEC championships, right? Well, it's not your fault. You're just not good enough, Barry. Yep, this, that, and the other. Exactly correct. That sums up the Spurrier era. But right now, it is different. And yeah, Roger, it's totally an overused cliche, changing the culture. But that's what's in the process of happening. And I'll never forget it, man. It's ingrained in my being, just seeing Lou Holtz and listening to Lou Holtz talk about that. And I understand. I guess I understood it at the time, but I just don't think that you can talk your way through that. It's just, I guess you have to address it, right? And I remember at the time Lou Holtz would come up with he'd make his players take a Carolina and Clemson test about the rivalry and just to try to school them up, give them some history. That was kind of Holtz's approach, right? Holtz comes in and reads the history of what a Gamecock actually is, or the definition, the birth of the term and the whole thing. But you can't change a culture without changing the people there. Like, you have to have different people. I'm convinced of that. You can't switch the guy at the top and then everything's going to switch. Like, that is turning a battleship in a big way. And that, to me, that would seem to take so long. You just got to have new people who approach things in a new way. And that's what has happened at South Carolina football. And let's be very clear. And I give Shea Beamer credit for this too, like being very realistic and not afraid to talk about stuff that didn't go well. First quarters, especially last year, he brought that up media day the other day. Talking about some bad first quarters out there, Texas A&M and Tennessee, and so let's not pretend that everything was great and moving in an undeniable positive direction. And Shane Beamer even got sarcastic with we're going around and patting everybody on the back saying, yeah, we're picked to finish 5th in the East with no SEC first teamers preseason wise. So he gets it for sure. And that's what I give him credit about. It was almost like Will Muschamp was unwilling to address things head on, to address criticism head on. I think because of, well, maybe that's just who he is, and in the Nick Saban-ish way of got to have control, and if we don't talk about it, maybe it's not an issue kind of thing. But to me, I always saw that as insecurity and baggage that I had heard kind of created at Florida, where there were some, I think, media relationships where Muschamp felt burned. And so he just wasn't going to put that stuff out there anymore. I mean, that was all insecurity, an overreach. Like, yeah, we all saw it, right? If it happened on the field and you don't talk about it, to me, that's a big issue. That's a massive light going off, road sign, highlighter. Hey, this is a problem, and it's only magnified, intensified by you not discussing it or acknowledging it is the better word. So I don't want to, in this conversation, say Shane Beamer's always positive and doing everything positive, and it's 100% that way. That's not it. DC, everything feels positive compared to the Muschamp years. Everything doesn't. Let's be very clear there. That Tennessee game last year, some of the losses for sure. Remember Shane Beamer after the Georgia loss? I guess that might be the best way to sum it up. Even in a relatively uncompetitive loss or at his most frustrated, Shane Beamer came off as likable to some degree in his post-game rant when asked how Georgia was having so much success against his defense, or maybe the Georgia defense was having so much success against the offense, I guess, because 5 stars all over the place. Just the exasperation, the honesty, even in that moment where he apologized to the reporter and the question and how he responded emotionally afterwards at the end of the rant. Like, even in that, there's something in there with just how he communicates that I think it was replayed everywhere, but it wasn't like Will Muschamp talking about supporting a former colleague. I'm trying to think of the situations. Like, Muschamp would get national play. This was when it was all going down at Maryland, right? About what kind of guy their head coach was and how he's a great guy and the whole thing. And it got replayed all over the place. Like, yeah, this is a lot different than what's going on being talked about and the feel around it. And just not to acknowledge, I guess, other people's perceptions, or I don't know what it is exactly. Chris, Facebook Live. I've always gotten excited about a new season of Gamecock football, but this year just feels different and really can't wait to prove a lot of people wrong. Chris, I would argue that this year feels a lot more similar to August for Gamecock football than in years past. I think the last few years have been the exception more than this year being the exception. Because that being around Gamecock football all my life, that's what August is. During non-emergency situations, which it has been that, or just non-bleak situations. You replace Brad Scott with Lou Holtz. You got optimism, man. I mean, you just lost your last 10 games of the season. You got a national championship guy coming in. He brings in big-time running back in the state of South Carolina, Derek Watson at the time. Hey, here you go. Then 11 straight losses. Oof, right? But that turned around nearly immediately the next season. Great, you beat New Mexico State. Stop the 21-game losing streak, pull down the goalposts, but in comes a Heisman contender in Quincy Carter in Georgia, and 5 picks. Going to beat them too. Go on to win a couple Outback Bowls, and that ended up being the ceiling for Gamecock football and Lou Holtz, unfortunately. The being able to repeat it and take things to the next level and stack recruiting class on recruiting class and get difference maker after difference maker. So difficult. But then, hey, all right, Lou Holtz on his way out and losing control of the program while he's on his way out, and bring in a guy Gamecock fans absolutely despised by and large previously, but he's going to be your guy. All right. How could you ask for a better University of South Carolina football coach than Steve Spurrier back in the day? And then Spurrier comes in, early frustrations. Not losing seasons, but not great seasons. Liberty Bowl, Independence Bowl. But then a Stephon Gilmore and a Marcus Lattimore and Alshon Jeffrey and a Jadeveon Clowney eventually. Not quite championship seasons, but 3 straight top 10 finishes, man. You look at the history of South Carolina football, 3 straight top 10s. Clearly as good as you get, and 5 straight wins over a Clemson program that was clearly getting better and winning ACC championships. And then it just fell off, right? So maybe it's since then. Maybe this is since the 2014 preseason that you have to go back to, 8 years ago. I don't think it's quite that far because, well, I do. Like this, right? Shane Beamer does not have a failed head coaching tenure, especially in the SEC, on his resume like Will Muschamp did. I think it was really hard for most Gamecock fans to see past that, to get over it, to go from guy who basically built Florida football into a national power and won a bunch of SEC championships there to guy that couldn't win an SEC championship and didn't win enough to remain the head coach at Florida, and convinced themselves that that was unique to Florida, but South Carolina is where he was going to figure it out. I mean, just that thought exercise, it's difficult. And I get it. There are some precedents out there, and Bill Belichick didn't win in his first head coaching job. Yeah, we got it. But the percentage chance of that happening with specifically Will Muschamp, specifically at South Carolina, that was a long shot. And I think most Gamecock fans knew it. If they didn't know it or admit it, I think they felt it. It was almost like Will Muschamp felt it, wasn't it? Sometimes. Just in the kind of the closed off nature of how the program ran, I felt like he felt it, or it kind of exuded from the program all those years. Even though, again, I don't think you have to go back that far. I think you go back right after the Outback Bowl year where South Carolina, Jake Pentley come back against Michigan, win 9 games, go 9-4 that season. Even afterwards, Muschamp says, yeah, this is not This is not the level we want to get to. We know there's more to come. All gas, no brakes. Bentley's going to be the guy, face of the program, in-state guy. Other big-time players, Debo Samuel, Hayden Hurst. Like we got to deal with reality here, right? There was plenty to be excited about back then, too. Not knowing what was going to come. But I can give you a Will Muschamp pass there, because that's a big factor, and there's a lot to overcome there, and Shane Beamer doesn't have that. If anything, he has the opposite, right? He's got the shadow, the foot, the massive shoes to fill with his Hall of Fame coaching dad and having coached with him, and then around the SEC and other big time coaches, including Steve Spurrier, he's associated with, and Oklahoma most recently. And you guys, if you're just joining us, I think it's worth repeating. Quiet football camps right now are good football camps. Oklahoma's football camp is not very, very quiet. Just had a coach step in it, basically. I didn't even know Mike Gundy's younger brother was an assistant at Oklahoma. Cale Gundy, I kind of remember. I know played quarterback at Oklahoma back in the day, set a bunch of records. Did not realize he had been there through the 14 Big 12 titles, and then was a stayover. Makes sense that he was a stayover, right? Brent Venables getting the job, having had coached with him previously at Oklahoma. You make a massive coaching change. Lincoln Riley makes the massive move to get out of Oklahoma. All the success that was there in place, it makes sense for Venables not to come in and completely clean house, especially being a first-year guy. But then I guess there was an incident in a meeting room that now has caused Cale Gundy to resign his job. And so Oklahoma dealing with that distraction and that upheaval, really, from a staff perspective. Love all you guys weighing in this morning. Josh with all gas, no brakes. Then Jake Bentley's brakes, his acceleration foot, LOL. Roger, the bowl win over North Carolina, big for several reasons, but one was that the Clemson game in the finale was really over at halftime. Took some of that indigestion away and gave USC some momentum. Great point, Roger. Can you imagine if there was no bowl game for South Carolina, how the conversation would be different? Now, I think the thing that would allow Gamecock fans to move past that a lot quicker than in years past would be that that's just what it's been. And Clemson's program has been so dominant outside of last year. But, yeah, they were dominant in that game. And there was nothing really good to take from it from the South Carolina perspective in a lot of ways. Yeah, DC, the second year Will Muschamp, certainly one of the ugliest 9-win seasons of all time. Remember it being called as much at the time, right? You could go through the SEC East and see the programs that were down, Tennessee, Florida, most notably then. It really played out that you don't want to be the guy to replace the guy. For Muschamp, Beamer fell into a good place. Yeah, you never want to be the guy that replaces the guy. Chad Holbrook. Will Muschamp. Tough spots. They knew it going in. But there are also some advantages there too, right? I mean, you're not going to a place like Lou Holtz took over where not only have you lost a bunch of games, but from a facility standpoint, from a program perception standpoint, you're buried in the SEC. You might have been below Vanderbilt at the time. That's not what Will Muschamp took over. He did have the benefit of getting to design basically his own operations building center, and I'll never forget that thing when it was being dedicated with his name on the building. Ken and Cindy Long, Ken giving some of the opening remarks before they cut the ribbon. He's like, all right, no excuses now, Will. and turned out to, I mean, that was part of the environment. Maybe that was also part of, not maybe, that had to also be part of Will Muschamp's kind of hunkering down, us against the world mentality. Because I mean, when that is one of your biggest program supporters saying it out loud in front of everybody at that time, that's pretty rough. I think it was meant to be a joke and the whole thing be completely lighthearted, but I will forever remember that. And that's probably the main things that'll stick out to me in the Will Muschamp era. But you're right. Shane Beamer was mentioned at the time, but can you imagine? It was a tough enough sell for a lot of Gamecock fans to get in Shane Beamer as a head coach when they did. At what, 43, 44? Still no head coaching experience. But, yeah, so I think it was 43 at the time he was hired because it was 21 years as an assistant coach out there in major college football, most recently from Oklahoma. And still, a lot of Gamecock fans, I think, were in that raising their hand saying, I don't see it on the resume. Compared to previous head coaches, you got to get a guy who's won and a track record, and it's difficult here and the whole thing. And those were legit concerns, right? But to have thought that Gamecock fans were going to be able to get over that, get past that 5 years prior, before even the Oklahoma move for Shane Beamer, I think he would have come straight from Georgia at that point. That would have been a massive, difficult sell. And to put out the virtues of love and joy and the whole thing coming off the Steve Spurrier era, and if wins were not piling up or getting close to double digits that Carolina fans had just seen, that would have been a really tough environment, really tough sell for Shane Beamer. So from that standpoint, Craig, it could not have been better timing for Beamer specifically. Gamecock fans would love to not have had to go through that difficult period for sure. But maybe if you're going to look back at it, the big picture, that's certainly more the rule out there than the exception for legendary head coaches. That it gets rough after they leave. So now here we sit, right? August 8th, things going into the first full week of Gamecock preseason practice and college football preseason practice in general. All quiet on the Gamecock front. And Will Muschamp used to get hammered for that, right? Oh, so secretive and always controlling and doesn't let people talk. And don't get me wrong, it was a media day. It was everybody out there for Gamecock football, and plenty of FaceTime and comments. And you're probably still seeing those as they're being released or aired or published online. So it's not like you don't have conversation and relatively recent stuff, but as far as details out of preseason camp and the whole thing, you're not getting that specifically. Maybe some sources say, or what I've been told kind of stuff. There's just always going to be that for college football, unless there's a massive change where it's NFL-esque and practices can be opened and the whole thing. I'm fascinated by that. The secrecy, it's really a competition thing, right? How guarded you are from a competitive standpoint there. Like the fact that Steve Spurrier felt the need to close practices down tells me all I need to know about guarding of information or keeping a competitive balance. Like even the most highly competitive and confident guy out there realized that you can't just show everybody what you're doing. So we're not getting a ton of info right now, and we won't. It's just what it is. And Will Muschamp, again, got hammered for that consistently. But I think it's just, it played into who he is. While Shane Beamer making some of those very similar decisions right now, but it feels a lot different, right? So DC hated our league and program, made me nauseous. I hear you. But I definitely remember a lot of Gamecock fans loving program after South Carolina beat a top 5 Georgia team in Athens several years ago. Again, another head shaker, head scratcher. How did that happen? But it's much more of a pleasant conversation to have these days when you got football season 26 days away from kicking off. When you got a preseason Heisman favorite this time last year as a new quarterback. And certainly going to be one of the faces of the program, if not the face, and interested to hear Shane Beamer's explanation about Spencer Rattler's perception. Because he's got a chance to kind of rewrite things in a lot of ways. Or maybe, depends how you look at it, to regain the reputation of being a guy, one of the best college football quarterbacks in the country. Let's put it that way. One of the best players in the country. I think you'll see it if that happens. And I got no clue the likelihood of that happening, right? Because I got to admit my own bias there, my own personal bias, having watched South Carolina football for as long as I have, knowing that Todd Ellis is the last drafted quarterback from the University of South Carolina, and how mind-blowing that is compared to other SEC programs or just major college football programs. But also having seen Dylan Thompson, Connor Shaw play well at quarterback for Carolina through the years. I'm a big Steve Tannehill guy. So knowing that you could certainly be nationally relevant to some degree as a quarterback at the University of South Carolina, but no one's come in like Spencer Rattler has come in. And I hate the hyperbole. That's easy to fall into, right? Is he the greatest of all time, or is that the best you've ever seen? Like, we do that way too much from a sports conversation. But also, you got to acknowledge when it is just different. And Spencer Rattler is different. He comes to Carolina different. And for Shane Beamer to mention the QB1 stuff and that he still hasn't seen it, like, I was that guy too. I get it that you don't necessarily, like, I would respect, I assume Shane comes at it from a similar way as I do. We're about the same age. And maybe he has the same kind of TV taste as me. Like, I hate reality TV by and large. Hate it. Not a fan. Fake stuff. It's clearly made up when I'm watching it. I think the Real Housewives trend is, it makes me so sad about humanity. If ever I see any kind of clip or social media stuff, it'll pop up. Ugh. So to have not watched the QB1 series about Spencer Rattler, I guess I can understand it. But having worked at Oklahoma at the time he came in, that's where I find it hard to believe. Like, hey man, this is a guy coming into your program. Maybe it's that they already had him wrapped up, right? Because the show was during Rattler's senior year, and it was obviously, I mean, that was part of the show that he was already committed to Oklahoma. Everybody knew it. So maybe everything was in and they didn't feel the need to do that. Or I guess as a college football coach, maybe your time just needs to be spent and channeled in so many other directions, recruiting especially. And I know Shane was one of the head coaches recently. I know Dabo Swinney as well, worried about mentioning it publicly, worried about assistant coaches burning out and just the grind that being a college football coach is, and him having been an assistant coach at the time. You don't want the reputation of, hey, I'm just watching TV. But to not have done the research on your own guy, or to know that is going to be the perception of him based off of it, and maybe you can gain some information and work the other way off of it. That I find that really fascinating. To me, it's part of what you got to have when you're in Shane's position, right? You got to know what you don't know and know what you don't want to know. And that's what I think that is. If you haven't seen it, then you can keep saying that. You can keep saying that, oh, well, I haven't seen that, so I'm not going to comment on it kind of thing. And college football coaches, unfortunately, way too often in very serious circumstances have taken that tact. The awful situations, there's numerous awful situations I can go into. I don't even bring those up. But now there will be no third chance from a public perception standpoint, I feel like. Spencer Rattler gets South Carolina. And this year specifically, if he can, and York weighing in with a good Gamecock Monday. Hello, York. Thanks for hopping in on that YouTube live stream, man. Talking a bunch of Gamecock football, as you might imagine, today. First full week in preseason camp. Not a lot of new news to talk about. New info coming out of the first 3 practices. And that's a good thing, I think, for the Gamecock specifically, or any other football practice out there. Craig says Rattler's accuracy has really had people talking. It just seems like the coaches are seeing something they haven't been, especially compared to the quarterbacks we've had recently. Okay, I hear you. I get it. But I remember hearing from someone I really trusted, and I think has a great reputation, that Colin Hill threw the football better than any Gamecock quarterback they had seen in a long time. I mean, I think you can go back to August 8th, 2021, 2020. You can go down the line, right? This time last year, it was, man, Luke Doty is really athletic, done everything needs to do to gain the respect of his teammates, and is a tremendous leader. And the options that he presents, a new offensive coordinator and Marcus Satterfield and the whole deal, right? Even with very little to work with from a roster standpoint, even seeing, I think it was Pro Football Focus at the time, putting Doty at like 105th in the country comparing quarterbacks. So there's always something you can take from a projected starting quarterback to get you excited in August, I feel like, if you're a good fan, if you want to support your program. I mean, there's always also things on the other side, too, that you can nitpick and say, well, this guy's not going to win the Heisman Trophy because, or this guy, I don't think he's even going to be the guy. So, to me, accuracy is one thing. And it's actually the thing, I think, that Shane Beamer has mentioned. Like, that's where you got to start. It's got to be at a certain level. Otherwise, you just can't play the position at the University of South Carolina. Maybe it was Marcus Satterfield who's mentioned that when he's been asked, what do you look for most in a quarterback, or how do you evaluate kind of things? That's the thing. And there's no doubt that we've heard that from guys, and I think they unknowingly were putting down Gamecock quarterbacks, guys from a receiving standpoint who've gone on to the NFL. What's the biggest difference between college and the NFL? He's like, man, those quarterbacks, they're putting the ball there every time. Mentioned that first that kind of caught my attention back in the day. I don't think it was Alshon Jeffrey. I'm trying to think who else it might have been. Maybe it's just, different guys through the years, maybe hearing that repeatedly in those jumps. I'm like, oh, okay, got it. You're not used to that. That's interesting. But that's the expectation, Craig. And there's no doubt about it. That Spencer Rattler comes in on a different level with different stats and a different reputation than any other quarterback in the history of South Carolina. It's just what it is. Come from Oklahoma. You won a Big 12 championship your freshman season. Your starting quarterback record, if that's really a thing, which is kind of overblown, but we used it all the time with Connor Shaw, right? The all-time winningest quarterback in South Carolina history. Spencer Rattler's 15-0 in his last 15 starts. Or maybe just 15-0 as a starter in college football. No, I think lost the first couple of games, right? His last 15 starts, 15-0. How much does that translate? And then I think I'm more interested in knowing the response to adversity. Because it's going to happen, man. There is no scenario where South Carolina football sails through the 2022 season. No scenario. I mean, I think you can make the argument real quick that you'll be lucky if that happens in the first quarter of the first game from an offensive perspective. Let's just go from a quarterback's perspective, right? There are no perfect games in football. I think T. Martin tried to throw one against Carolina back in the day where he set the NCAA record at the time. I think it was 99 for consecutive completions. Never forget watching that game in the stands. I think that was I believe a nooner, and it was just death by 1,000 cuts. But you can't play the quarterback position on any level and have success without responding well to adversity. And I think the Gamecock football program deserves a bunch of credit. And Beamer was asked the other day, outside of wins and losses, what he was most proud of in year number one. And that's the gist I got from him. The never stop fighting mentality, I think is what he mentioned. Maybe not verbatim, but something like that. And how you look at end of games, and I think it's having that cultural component, right? And that's what he's got to get from his transfer quarterback that you didn't see. None of us saw it. Maybe didn't have the opportunity, you could argue. But it didn't happen for Spencer Rattler at Oklahoma. And kind of went the other way. And that QB1 stuff I did just watch relatively recently. That's kind of the gist you got from there too. And that's probably unfair. I mean, all of it's unfair, right? When you're 17. Beamer saying that, I think all of us would agree. But on the other side of it, no one forced Spencer Rattler and his family to do QB1. So there's that too, right? You're going to increase your exposure and reap those benefits. You also got to take the criticism too. So none of us would have, we all understand there are plenty of examples when we are that age and probably any age that we could come off not like we wanted to. So I guess the question kind of remains out there. Who is Spencer Rattler as a college quarterback? Is he? I mean, he's been on both ends of the spectrum. He was just last year. is he the guy that Vegas has as the odds-on favorite to win the Heisman Trophy, or is he a guy who doesn't deserve to play? I mean, that's massive extreme, right? I don't know if we can come up with another example. If you guys have another example, please hit me up of a guy who was so well thought of as a quarterback going into a season and then it didn't work out. I'm thinking, I don't mean to take a shot at Clemson. Maybe, Troy, you can help me out. It was Cullen Harper back in the day, right? And for some reason, the way my brain works, when tickers go across, some of those things just stick with me. Like Mel Kiper having Marcus Lattimore number 1 on his running back board. I forget exactly when it was in his career, but that's something that just sticks with me on going on a ticker. And I think Cullen Harper was up there, number 1 quarterback in the country, and maybe even number 1 projected overall. And Marcus Lattimore was way up there, number 1 overall projected picks. And those are so ridiculous. 12 months out or 9 months out before a draft, however long it is, and clearly turned out to be inaccurate from Lattimore's standpoint because of injury. But I don't think that was the situation with Cullen Harper. It was, I don't know what it was exactly, besides a lack of production. I mean, Jake Bentley was projected as an NFL guy at some points. But that's the thing. Craig, I don't know why we do this as a country, and I think this is something I am trying to change personally, and certainly it's very important for how I'm raising my kids. The unwillingness to admit failure is something we have, right? Craig says, but Rattler didn't fail. Isn't he 10-0 his last 10 games, completed 76% of his passes? He's 15-0 his last 15 starts. But when you get benched as a starting quarterback, you failed. That's just what it is. But I don't understand the unwillingness to admit failure. Yeah, Caleb Williams is special, no doubt. Like, Jalen Hurts failed at Alabama in the first half of a national championship game. He failed to prove that he was the best option for the coaching staff to go with. Is Jalen Hurts a failure? No. But he did fail to do that. He failed to make plays. Just because you fail doesn't mean you are a failure. That's something that irks me, man, because the living life unwilling to admit failure is a difficult way to go through life, right? And those people are exhausting to be around, I feel like. But even worse than that is going through life unwilling to put yourself out there in a position to fail, right? That's when you're beat before you even play. You never gave yourself a chance. So I think it's very important to talk about failure differently than has been talked about or is talked about more. Like fighting that Will Muschamp was a failure at Florida, I don't get. Like, it didn't work out. They fired him. No, I guess maybe just you see it differently than I do. Like, I don't see 100% failure and like broken or no, man. Failure is something that we all have to deal with. And it's probably the most important thing to deal with in life, right? First of all, you got to have opportunities to fail or you're not going to grow. And then how are you going to respond to that? Like I'm trying a trick with my 2-year-old that I did. I know I did it with my second son, especially notably when he fell on his scooter the first time. I celebrated it, and it was never a thing. Like, he was looking to me to see how I reacted, and I knew it at the time. Like, it just hit me, and it was clear it was a minor fall, right? That helps. Then I was just like, yes, that was an awesome wipeout. How did it feel to do that? And I think that was his first exposure to that situation, and so that one Like, just hit him. Oh, I could celebrate this or get excited about falling instead of the opposite. And so now with a 2-year-old, when he falls down and starts, like, he's just kind of at that stage anyway where he's going to go instantly to tears and sensitive kid and fall apart. And I'll just try to get excited with him and say, oh, what happened after you fell? You got up. That's where Spencer Rattler is right now, right? Fallen. If you don't want to call it failed, then don't. Okay? That's how I approach things. I just give you that personal stuff to let you know where I'm coming from now. My perspective on it is there is absolutely no shame in getting beaten out by Caleb Williams. That's kind of your point, Craig. Exactly. That's my point. There is no point to failing in that. No point to be ashamed, embarrassed, whatever it is, to failing in that situations. I think you can argue right now. I mean, I've seen some national quarterback rankings that have Caleb Williams right at the top, but Spencer Rattler not far behind. We all saw it with Tua Tagovailoa and Jalen Hurts. Like, Jalen Hurts has gone on to be a starting quarterback in the NFL. Clearly not a failure. Spencer Rattler has the chance now to change his public perception in such a drastic way. I mean, I respect what Jalen Hurts went through and how he came out on the other side of it. I think as much, if not more, than nearly any college quarterback I can remember. Having gone through that, the way he handled that. And by all accounts, there is no like smoking gun in the reputation, in the personal history for Spencer Rattler, where there was an instance caught on video in a game that clearly hurt his team and the whole thing. So that's why I say there's nothing you can't get past. The opportunity is there. And then to do it at the University of South Carolina, to do it in year number 2 with Shane Beamer, to do it on an offense that just hasn't been very good for a long time. It's 2014 I got to go back to, when South Carolina was a good offense. And that wasn't on a necessarily a good team. South Carolina's offense in college football hasn't been good since then. I guess maybe we could look at the numbers. Maybe that 9-4 season, those were pretty good offensive numbers with Jake Bentley. I know the offensive numbers against Clemson, I think it was the following years when he put up all the yards and but in my opinion, you're not just a good offense with good numbers, right? The best offenses in college football give your team a chance to win every single game and have their own identity. And G.A. Mangus has crystallized that the best. The former Gamecock assistant coach was on with us here and says that he consults with all kind of football programs at various levels, but I think he was talking about mostly college. And the advice that he gives is you got to major in something. And at some point, and that was another big issue with the Will Muschamp era, right? The RPO, I guess, might have been the reputation offensively. But when you're allowing the defense to dictate what you do as an offense, that's a tough way to be, right? And you can say, well, we're just taking what the defense gives us, and that's the smart move and the whole thing. But at some point, especially in football, you got to impose your will on the other guy. Your team has to be able to do what it wants to do, and the other team has to know it's coming, and you got to be good enough to do it. And South Carolina's offenses, they haven't been that by and large in a long time. Yeah, Troy, the resident Clemson fan, 2014. Very good offense. Dylan Thompson, most underrated quarterback in South Carolina history, in my opinion. I'm with you on that, Troy. And he's underrated because the defense was so overrated going in, with Lorenzo Ward saying the Gamecocks were going to be better without Jadeveon Clowney. I feel like that offense won Carolina a bunch of games in the fourth quarter. It's just that the defense gave them right back. And so history gets written in a certain way where it's easy to ignore quarterbacks who don't win. But now, I guess my point in this little gas baggy hot take here is that Spencer Rattler is at a point in his career where, especially with where college sports are now, transfer portal, and I saw the news from last week, towards the end of last week, where if you were expecting the rubber stamp on the transfer deal, that didn't happen for the first opportunity from the NCAA. They're going to revisit it now here at the end of the month. But I think they were saying, from what I was reading, that the transfer windows would be too limiting for athletes, so they need to change the way they were going to. I mean, I only read that as unlimited transfers. What they offered was too limiting because of the being transfer windows out there. So I don't know if I read that right, but it still seems to be very, very much a not too distant reality that you're going to get unlimited transfers in college football. So transferring now is not nearly what it used to be. This is not a knock at all. A lot of times it's just part of free agency in college football these days. I mean, we just saw a guy who won the award for the best wide receiver in the country transfer. Jordan Addison from Pitt to Southern Cal, and to go play with Caleb Williams, actually, and Lincoln Riley, Spencer Rattler's former coach. So being a good quarterback for Lincoln Riley was just the expectation, not just being a good quarterback, being the best in college football, because we saw it happen. Different guys, same results, right? Baker Mayfield, Kyler Murray. And Spencer Rattler was supposed to continue the tradition. Jalen Hurts, I got to throw him in there. And he saw Jalen Hurts come in, and he saw the success of that. But not enough, and ultimately it didn't work out. But especially just knowing the Jalen Hurts situation, knowing that you can transfer and then you can get it back. Spencer Rattler has that opportunity, and he has the opportunity now to do kind of the reverse of what a couple of those guys did anyway. Baker Mayfield transferred to Lincoln Riley. Jalen Hurts transferred to Lincoln Riley. All of those guys. Kyler Murray, they all transferred to him and had a bunch of success after. They've all gone on to varying degrees of success in the NFL, with Kyler Murray being at the top, and most recently the amazing story of the homework clause, and then Arizona taking it away. But if you can be a guy who transfers from Oklahoma and then goes on and has a bunch of success at a place where they didn't have success the year before, and I get it, Carolina won 7 games last year, and the bowl game offense looked pretty tremendous. Outside of that, Jason Brown making some ridiculous plays in that Florida game, we all know that the offense struggled. Let's just put it that way. And that's where Rick Sanford on the show last time was saying, how did you win 7 games without a quarterback? He's not trying to be disrespectful. He's just calling it what it is when you have 4 guys. If you count Dakereon Joyner starting as quarterback in the bowl game, you have 4 different quarterbacks that won games as starting quarterbacks. Incredible, right? And clearly none of them was the guy. I know Luke Doty was supposed to be the guy going in. It didn't work out that way. Maybe he can still be the guy. Let's not get overly sensitive here. I think he's in a great spot right now. I was talking to my pops over the weekend. He's a big Gamecock guy. He's like, what's Luke Doty? What's his role going to be? Like backup quarterback. Like, oh, he's too talented for that, right? I understand what he's saying, and who knows how he does end up getting used. But if we're going to look back on the South Carolina track record, I think it would be best case scenario if Luke Doty is simply a backup quarterback this year. If that can allow him to watch. First of all, if he's just the backup quarterback, that means you got good players on the outside and you don't need his athleticism out there because he's the best option, right? It's kind of damning now to look back on it. I thought it was definitely a compliment at the time. And I thought it was going to lead to us watching a really special guy when Will Muschamp said after Luke Doty's first spring, he went to the offensive coaches, said, all right, you guys, who you got? Who's your top 11? And all of those guys, I think he said at the time, put Luke Doty on the field and not at the quarterback position because he was one of the most 11 talented guys they had, one of the most talented 3 guys they would have on the outside. I thought that was just high praise for a guy like we saw Matt Jones at Arkansas back in the day go from quarterbacks exclusively at Arkansas and then to wide receiver in the NFL. He just kind of unicorn that way. I mean, you've seen it to varying degrees with other guys too. But it turned out to be, I think, maybe more damning to guys on the outside at Carolina, or where the wide receiver quality depth ended up getting to, despite it on paper being pretty good. And to see a guy like Luke Doty not have success at quarterback after he was moved that way. Injuries playing a large part in that for sure. But seeing Savell Newton kind of start at wide receiver and then move to quarterback and then move from there, and how that didn't work out for him moving forward. To know South Carolina's track record for quarterbacks working out and getting drafted in the NFL and how that hasn't been a thing. I think I would say, if I have the easy explanation for why that has been, because of they just haven't been allowed to develop. Played it on radio a few years ago, Dan Mullen's thoughts about fairness for giving guys time to develop as quarterbacks in their college careers and not putting them out there too early. And Perry Orth's voice is in the back of my head right now, how important confidence is to a quarterback. I think he put the numbers on, it's like 90%. That's how important it is. And to have seen quarterback after quarterback after quarterback in their Carolina careers thrust out there early, oftentimes as freshmen, true freshmen at that, and not have success. Well, a lot of times they just weren't set up for it. And we might be able to come back and say, hey, maybe they just weren't good enough. Okay. But Connor Shaw wasn't good enough in his first start. I know that. He looked brutal in that first quarter against East Carolina. And Stephen Garcia comes in and looks like he's a Heisman Trophy type quarterback. Getting the offense to 56 points that game, I think. But clearly that wasn't the end of Connor Shaw's career, and it wasn't the career path that Garcia was on. Developing, man. And that's one of the things I think that helped allow Dylan Thompson to become the quarterback that he became, that he got to watch and learn as much as he did behind Connor Shaw and go in for a game against an East Carolina back in the day where he had the opportunity to play well and then did and was able to build on it. So many guys. I mean, you can name so many of them, right? It's almost all of them. Lorenzo Nunez and Brandon McElwain, and forgettable names at quarterback for the Gamecocks for sure. But as true freshmen put out there, I mean, as a reclassified true freshman, Jake Bentley, right? It's hard for me to believe that none of those guys was good enough to be a good college quarterback. That had they been in a different situation where you see guys sit for a couple of years, typically, I know you get on the field earlier these days maybe than any other time, and there are plenty of examples of guys having success early on in their careers. Matt Corral is a great example, I think, right? The difference between what Gamecock fans saw from him coming in only because of injury, I think it was in the fourth quarter in that shootout, that Brian Edwards one-hand catch day, the Will Muschamp shootout game, which is a weird sentence to say. But he was overwhelmed. The moment was way too big for him. And then just to see him last year and after the game, just laughing it up, yucking it up about how he knew what the Gamecock defense was going to do before they did it. You got Lane Kiffin throwing the boards. I guess that was not last season, but 2 seasons ago. It's crazy. Oh, Tommy Beecher. Chris says, who was the kid that started against Cincy State and threw 6 picks and we never saw again? That wasn't a case of being thrust out there too early. I think that was just a case of Beecher was his own guy. Right? Came in as South Carolina kind of being the only guy who recruited him because of a prior relationship, I think, with his dad having played for Spurrier at Duke. And it was really surprising that he had won the starting quarterback job. And then, Spurrier basically said that the kid didn't want to go back out there. But no, Roger, I don't. Do you think Rattler feels less pressure at South Carolina than Oklahoma, or is it just a different kind of pressure? I think, if anything, there's got to be more. And this is always a weird kind of question, in my opinion. You're never going to get the true answer. No one ever answers that question with yes. Because the coaches, players get asked it all the time. Is there more pressure for you to win here today? And what the classic cliche is, well, there's never more pressure than what the pressure I put on myself is. Again, second chance and last chance, I think, for Spencer Rattler. So from that standpoint, I think there's more. But when you're taking over for that line of quarterbacks that I mentioned, Baker Mayfield, Kyler Murray, Jalen Hurts, preseason Heisman favorite, playing for Lincoln Riley, where the offense has just almost always been at the highest level of college football. Very little margin for error. Maybe you get more margin for error this year as a starting quarterback for South Carolina. Maybe it helps that Luke Doty is the backup quarterback and not Caleb Williams. I don't think Marcus Satterfield's going to be quick to pull a trigger. I mean, you could probably argue that Lincoln Riley wasn't either. Connor Mitch, thanks, DC. Another big-time name. Big-time, highly recruited guy, Chris Smelly. I mean, we can do this for a while, unfortunately, from the Gamecock perspective. And maybe DC asking him because Connor Mitch didn't have to go out there early on and just didn't develop into the guy. Yeah, I would say that was where Steve Spurrier had his quarterback position in line. It was how it needed to be because of Connor Shaw's stability and production as long as he did it, right? Then Dylan Thompson was behind him. Then Connor Mitch had to wait behind Dylan Thompson, and that was going to be the natural handoff. And Mitch just didn't turn out to be a player, unfortunately, for everybody involved from the Gamecock perspective there. But that doesn't pertain. Like, Spencer Rattler is a player. The question just is, how good is he? And also, how good is Marcus Satterfield as a quarterback's coach and offensive coordinator in the SEC? How good are the weapons around him? We know Josh Vann was pretty good last year when he definitely needed to be. at wide receiver. We know Corey Rucker has been good at Arkansas State. We know Juice Wells has been good at James Madison. That's not being good at South Carolina. I'm not saying they can't. I'm saying that's what it is. Right? We've seen examples of other guys being good other places and it not translating to South Carolina. E.J. Jenkins was talked about a lot this time last year. Now he's at Georgia Tech. What about the offensive line? They're being talked about a lot very positively, as seems to be the tradition in August for South Carolina football. I feel like it's been a yearly tradition for a long time, man. Maybe it's because if you're in Columbia, you're within physical proximity to these physically dominant human beings. And you better not talk bad. Just don't talk bad about a big guy. It's not smart. But to hear, to know that Javon Gwynn got the nod and is a captain and got to go to SEC Media Days, to hear Shane Beamer the other day talk about Gwynn's perfect summer. If you could have a perfect summer and hit every single test, it's nearly impossible to do, but Javon Gwynn did it. That is naturally going to get fans encouraged. And I feel like it's been a yearly tradition now of talking up an offensive line and expecting them to be one of the best in the SEC without understanding just how difficult that is. I mean, you can be the 10th best offensive line in the SEC and be, 20th, 30th for sure best in the country, can't you? I think that's fair. But when you see it game in and game out and you're going up against top 10, top 15, top 25, probably at the least, opposing defensive lines in the conference, you're not looking that good. And those of us from the outside looking in think, well, what were you talking about, man? Why were you encouraged about the offensive line when we're seeing this? And it's just not that simple. But can this one be one that does clearly stand out? And can, for instance, what I wouldn't even be posing these questions again if I hadn't seen what I saw in the bowl game from the Gamecock offense and Marcus Satterfield. I would just tell you that I don't know why. I don't know what was going on last year, and I don't know why there's much optimism for year two. Because there are a lot of examples the other way. Shane Beamer himself pointing some of those out, right? There's a lot to improve, and he knows it. His staff knows it. They're making sure they are communicating that. He's pumped that there is optimism, expectations, energy, enthusiasm around the program, but no one knows better than Shane himself and his staff, I think, that they got to do a lot of things better than they did in year number one if they're going to have a good year number two. And offensive line is definitely at the top of my list for that. Because it doesn't matter. You have to be a Johnny Manziel type magician. And you got to have an absolute monster like Mike Evans back in the day, like Texas A&M did, if you're going to overcome not having any time and just running around making plays at any kind of consistent level. And that expectation would be way too high. Interesting. DC says 6 solid wins is all I'm asking for. I don't think it is, DC. Knowing the schedule, 3 of those wins would be against clearly inferior opponents. You got Charlotte, South Carolina State, and Georgia State on the schedule. That's 3 of the first 5 games, right? Because then who are the 3 other wins coming against? Vandy, Mizzou, and one other in the SEC, and you're going to be happy? I don't see it. Because that would be 6 other losses 5 in the SEC, you go 3-5 again, and then a Clemson loss, presumably. And maybe beat Auburn, right? Again. And what if Auburn doesn't even have their head coach at the time? You definitely are not going to be happy if you lose to Kentucky. South Carolina fans never are, even though they're picked to finish second. I don't think you're going to be happy if you lose to Florida in year number 1 with Billy Napier, knowing what Florida was last year and how dominant the Gamecocks were in that game, even though I think they were, 19-point underdogs? Something ridiculous like that. It's hard to wrap my brain around as I say it out loud. I get it from a mathematical standpoint, DC. I think maybe what you're even saying, the solid wins, I think it's how losses look that might be more important than the wins, because South Carolina didn't have 6 solid wins last year in the regular season. That East Carolina game was anything but solid. Fortunate is the best way to put that one, I think, and that's putting it kindly. Who else last year from a fortunate win standpoint? Auburn and Florida, most notable wins in the regular season. I'm just saying, I get what you're saying, but I also understand how the roller coaster works and it's not just a Gamecock fan base perspective. It's just the roller coaster that is football season. It's one of the reasons why we all love it, because there will be ups and there will be downs, and we will all shake our head and come in on Monday. Oh yeah, Vandy, fortunate. So that puts it at 4 solid wins for Carolina. Maybe that's just splitting hairs there. Yeah, Chris says that Vandy game can't happen again like that. And that's one of those, unfortunately, Carolina's not getting credit if it goes the other way either. You spank Clark, Lee, and Vandy, great. Congratulations. Exactly what you're supposed to do. Nobody talks about them. Nobody gives them any credit. And to know that game was as close as it was last year can be, I mean, if you just need any kind of pump the brakes ammunition, go East Carolina, and that should do it, right? But you could also go the other way, right? I mean, Auburn virtually had Alabama beat last year. Carolina handled Auburn. Florida came in as a massive favorite, and Dan Mullen at that point, and oh yeah, trailing Troy, huh? There are plenty of examples, and that's part of what makes the August conversation around college football so fun, because it's not just South Carolina, right? Maybe there are certainly some specific points of drama that are all South Carolina, and this year to have Spencer Rattler in that conversation, for it to be year number 2, to have Shane Beamer as dynamic a personality as he is, or maybe as a dynamic shift of personality that he is compared to what Gamecock fans had before, might be the best way to put that. To have all the recruiting pieces involved that you have to have at South Carolina. Now to have the transfer options that clearly worked out in the Gamecocks' favor after year number 1. The offensive coordinator situation. That was a weird way to say coordinator. The offensive coordinator situation. Maybe I was trying to say the offensive production situation, or lack thereof, from year number 1. I mean, the defense definitely just completely under-talked about, I think. Or maybe it's just because they were so good and solid in year number 1, or Clayton White. You expect that again with most of the personnel there. J.J. Adigbare being a big piece. Aaron Sterling on the outside as well. But to have other pieces, it's Jordan Birch and Alex Huntley being talked about as a couple of Columbia natives going into year number 3 in the program, and having worked their way up the depth chart, Birch being a former 5-star guy. But you're going to have to see production, and it's going to be difficult early on, right? Even the first half of the season, because of the way the schedule sets up. Only sets up for disaster in week 1. You're not going to get a lot of bonus points for handling Georgia State. It's going to be a tremendous atmosphere, night game, new LED lights going September 3rd, former interim coach, Camden native, guy who knows all about Columbia, plenty of motivation for Sean Elliott to get another win in an SEC building like he did against Tennessee a couple of years ago. But then after that, at Arkansas, then Georgia comes to town. Now, you go just 2-1 there, you are set up for success for sure. You do anything other than that, and it gets difficult because then you got the 2 non-conference games after that, I believe, South Carolina State and Charlotte. So you're not getting anything there, and you're 5 games in with 6 SEC games left in Clemson staring you in the face. That's the challenge of South Carolina football, but it's that every single year. And I guess this year the schedule not thought to be especially difficult amongst the most difficult schedules in college football. We'll see how that ends up turning out, how it plays out. Wanted to mention, hadn't touched on it yet, Major League Baseball perspective. Rough weekend for the Braves. Just lost their 3rd straight after dropping a doubleheader on Saturday and then losing again yesterday. Now 6.5 games behind the Mets, but wanted to point out a stat I saw on ESPN for anybody who's belly aching and whining about the Braves today. It's the first time all season long they've lost 3 games in a row. That is the best run in Major League Baseball in more than 2 decades. So if anybody's whining, anybody complaining from a Braves perspective, if you're one of those people, check yourself. 2001 Seattle Mariners, the only team in recent baseball history to have lost 3 games later in the season for the first time than the Atlanta Braves. It's been a tremendous season and a tremendous turnaround starting in June. Don't be that guy. Don't be that girl. Just of a 2-day stretch where you lose 3 games against one of the best teams in baseball this year. That's what the Mets are, especially when they get back to Grom and he throws like he did yesterday, taking a perfect game in the 6th. That's reality. Got to deal with it. Don't spaz. Don't whine and bellyache. Don't start pointing fingers and saying the manager should have done this and done that, and the players and Spencer Strider. I love Strider, by the way. First of all, under the radar kind of guy in college. He's 5-2, I think, in his Clemson career. And his stuff he has, how he's burst on the scene this year. But did you guys see the comment he had last night? Yeah, they had a lot of weird hits, and they seem to be getting a lot of luck. That's good. It's August. We'll see how it turns out in October. Maybe you don't want your rookie saying that who hasn't done it in October and wasn't part of the World Series championship, but maybe that's part of a championship culture rubbing off on a guy that has been in the organization. Maybe I think that's why I love it. Just confident, bring it on type mentality, especially knowing the opponent is someone you're probably going to have to go through in the National League right now. And clearly you're going to have to go through them if you're going to win the East Division. But just wanted to touch on that from the Braves perspective over the weekend. Notable for sure. I get disappointed, frustrated. You don't want to see that. You're a Braves fan. But hey, man, it's been a heck of a run. Baseball has a way of evening out a little bit. Still need to be there to support the team kind of deal. Get right back into Gamecock football as well, but wanted to make sure that you saw, if you are a Gamecock fan, the basketball headline that Lamont Paris got a local recruit, AC Flora High School. Colin Murray Boyles is the player's name. He's 6'7", a guy who will actually play this upcoming season. So he's the first guy in the next class. Not that weird situation where you get the announcement that G.G. Jackson's committed, and then about 48 hours later, he's officially signed and in the program and playing this year when he was projected to be that next class. So Murray Boyles is going into his senior season. As far as we know, that is going to happen. And he's actually going to go play at a prep school out in Utah and not at AC Flora, but 6'7" guy, a 3-star type guy that's been relatively under the radar from a recruiting standpoint. St. Bonaventure's, SMU, Belmont offers, gotten some communication, I think, from other Power 5 big-time programs. But the Gamecocks getting their first recruit for the next recruiting class, and now getting the perception for sure of keeping local guys. Now, I will warn everyone really quick. Darren Horn had a lot of South Carolina guys. So developing these guys is much more important than getting local kids to commit to play basketball at the University of South Carolina. How G.G. Jackson develops and how he handles year number one with the spotlight completely on him, and having been the number one recruit in his class, having the North Carolina situation. That's going to be the trick. But I don't think you can look at this anything other than in a positive light in a lot of ways. And also knowing maybe the willingness or the ability to get a top end guy and a number one recruit in the country, and then willingness to kind of stick your neck out is how I see this. Say, all right, you don't have another Power 5 offer? We see it. Come play for us. We're going to make it happen. From a recruiting standpoint, it was the big offensive lineman, nicknamed Tree, up in the Washington, D.C. area, playing for DeMatha High School, same high school that Marshawn Lloyd played at. And that commitment happened on Friday. Gamecock fans kind of been waiting for that to happen. All the recruiting reporting around football, I mean, you feel like you get so much on the radar and you get so much information about, all right, then here's the commitment date. Here's when it is expected to happen. You get the tips from the head coaches on Twitter about commitments happening behind the scenes, and then they become public, and there's not a whole lot to hide from the football recruiting standpoint. But that was positive news on Friday from the Gamecock perspective. Just move it up a spot in the On3 consensus team rankings that I saw. 9 4-star guys, including their most recent commitment. 8 3-star guys in a class of 17 right now is where the numbers are for the Gamecocks at number 21. I know there are at least 2 or 3 4-star guys thought to be strong Gamecock leans who are set to make their commitments public, I think, in the next few days or weeks as the high school football season is about to kick off. And typically these guys, if they're going to make it early, want to go ahead and get it out of the way before their season starts so they can have that off their shoulders. So something to keep an eye on for sure in the coming weeks as the conversation around the current Gamecock football team continues to intensify. The anticipation continues to crank up. Should get more information. More information would be some now, I guess, right? Because did have Shane Beamer pop out a tweet yesterday at Coach S. Beamer, by the way, on Twitter. 3 great days on the practice field. Love the joy this team has competing each day, with the Spurs up hand emoji there. And then the picture of a little dancing going on. Clearly teammates, at least one teammate in the background enjoying it. But wow, how about the, Will Muschamp, classic Muschamp. This time of year would be to complain if it wasn't as hot as typical this time of year in Columbia, or if there was any kind of cloud cover, we'd be like, nah, that's not what we're looking for. We're looking to really get these guys exposed and train them up. And like, man, I get it. Even Steve Spurrier never said that much, right? And having been from Florida, I think it was just what preseason practice was, really hot, not the Muschamp preparation mindset of, yeah, we've got the advantage in South Carolina and we can really get our guys trained up in the heat and the whole thing, and we want it extra hot. Like it's gonna be tough no matter what. These last few days, especially as I was hanging out at the beach the last few days, can only imagine what they're putting themselves through. Speaking of that, Ryan Brewer, the Gamecock legend, put out a tweet recently. I retweeted it in the last several days, maybe a little bit more than that, about a story with Phil Petty being the leader of the team back in the day in a preseason practice, I think it was, where the coaches were making them run and it was rough, and Petty kind of rallied his guys and had them do even more, and it was a sign to the coaches, basically sticking it right to them, but obviously a story of Phil Petty's leadership. And I know a lot of those stories will be continued to relate to maybe the younger generation of Gamecock fans who weren't around to see Petty help turn things around with Lou Holtz back in the day for those Outback Bowl wins after the 21-game losing streak, and how his memory now continues to be honored after passing away recently. Shane Beamer pointing that out specifically in his last comments, and talking about getting a chance to spend some time with the Petty family. Troy says, I see 4 probable wins for South Carolina. South Carolina State, Charlotte, Georgia State, and Vandy. Probable losses. So how many is that? 1, 2, 3, 4 probable losses in Georgia, Texas A&M, Arkansas, and Clemson. And then 4 toss-ups, he says. So let me fill that out for the toss-ups. Kentucky, Florida, Tennessee, and Missouri. So say 2-2 in the toss-ups gets you a 6-6 win total there. I think that's a pretty fair breakdown. I get it that's from a Clemson fan, keep in mind, but maybe from if you want to change the way that reads, you don't like probable losses. If you want to go underdogs and favorites, I think it's fair to say the Gamecocks will be favored in 4 games this year for sure. Those 4 probable wins. I think it's very fair to say that Carolina will certainly be underdogs against Georgia, Texas A&M, Arkansas, and Clemson. I think you could, let's see, the 4 toss-ups, which ones would you say they would be favorites in right now? Maybe Missouri? Not Kentucky. Probably not Florida. And then what was the other game that we're missing there? I think I misspoke and I said Auburn earlier, but that one, that is not on the schedule this year, I think, right? So we got Kentucky, Mizzou. And I went through these and then I lost it in my head, right? Yeah, York says I may be wrong, but I put the Razorback game in the toss-up one too. Whew, yeah, I know. Yeah, I mentioned Tennessee before. That's right. Yeah, thank you guys for the Tennessee one. Sorry if I made you yell at your device/computer. However, you're tuning in this thing. It's much appreciated. And Chris, noon kickoff for the Georgia game is going to be horrible. Remember, it's same for Georgia. Maybe we're spoiled having seen the primetime games. That was a 2012 game, especially. So notable back in the day. I think it's a fair breakdown, especially from a Clemson fan. We're doing X's and O's. But at this time last year, Troy, I'm guessing you would have said, what, 4 wins? 4-8 you probably would have seen. No way you saw Auburn and Florida coming. Favorites against Missouri, dog against Kentucky, Florida, and Tennessee. Yep, I think that's fair. So then that math might change to more like 5 wins and 3 toss-ups. That's how Gamecock fans could look at it. Yeah, Chris says, not for the players, just for me. LOL. Yeah, that if you're going to that game, if you're planning on going to that game, and my Saturdays, day games, I think, are going to be completely taken out there. Just sports with the kids is kind of where I am in life. So that's not where my mindset is right now. But if you are planning on going to that game at noon on September 17th at Williams-Brice Stadium, Georgia and Carolina, yeah, you better do some preseason conditioning if you want to have any kind of experience. There you go. York says, started working out, cardio for tailgate season, all day drinking, and the walk up to Willie B. Yeah, just move. Get out in the sun. Get used to it if you've been inside all summer long in the air conditioning. That is not what September 17th is going to be for sure. Yeah, and Troy admits he was at 3-9 or 4-8 last year. All part of the fun, right? And I'm sure you would not have said 10-3 for Clemson. I don't know who would have. I mean, I don't think Gamecock fans would have, right? So the college football question marks on August 8th are always large, even if we think we know. Like that I'm glad we didn't talk about it too much because I know it's been a few days now since Nick Saban said his rebuilding year comment, that last year was a rebuilding year for Alabama. And I've seen the argument made that he's exactly right from the Alabama perspective. Quarterback wins the Heisman Trophy. You play for the national championship. Rebuilding year. To me, just to hear that, though, you can make the case, right? If I really wanted to be a college football dramatic guy, get a bunch of clicks, say, I think that's a sign. Saban's starting to feel it, starting to slip. I mean, the Jimbo Fisher offseason stuff was notable. Yeah, Troy's in on the offseason conditioning. Got to walk the hills at Clemson. Yeah, so you might want to work that into your offseason conditioning routine for sure. Wanted to conclude today. Well, I'll give you the big conclusion in just a second. Wanted to make sure that I mentioned today one of the sponsors of the program, Freedom Primary Care. If you value freedom in your healthcare situation, Freedom Primary Care is certainly the way to go. That is what I am doing with my family. Freedom Primary Care is up in Fort Mill, South Carolina, but they have telemedicine options for you. If you are not in the area, you can still be a part of what they offer now, which is a comprehensive approach of primary care, but also the ability, first of all, to put you in charge of your medical decisions, which I never thought was going to be a thing. That's a thing now. That is ultimately important to me and my family, but also their line, the line that I love, responsible to you, not responsible for you. They're gonna give you options out there. If you want to go the more natural minded way, you've got that path. If you want to go the more conservative or traditional route, they will put all those options out for you as well. And then you guys will come to a decision together. It's you in charge of your health care the way it should be for sure. Give them a call. Freedom Primary Care at 803-627-2447. Appreciate them for supporting the program. The more you guys can support those that support the show, the better the show gets. Great show as always, Roger says. Appreciate you helping to make that a reality. Troy, 12-0 last year for Clemson, he says, but based it on what I saw from DJU in 2020. All right, so tomorrow we'll have to get your numbers for this year based off what you saw in 2020 and 2021. A peace out from DC. For those of you, especially on the live stream, Chris in there as well, participating in the comments section. Always appreciated. 8 to 10 every morning, live streaming on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. And then, the audio portion live streaming as well on the Podbean. Chris says, have a good one. Go Cox.
And we're getting closer and closer, man. August 8th, 2022 edition of Tim Hill Unrestricted Free Agent in the books. Talk to you again live tomorrow, 8 a.m. Always on the podcast platforms as well. Podbean, the best place to go for that. I will stop yapping and let you get on with your day. See you guys tomorrow.